Welcome, everyone. People might be still coming on the call, but it's about 2 o'clock, so I think we'll get started. Welcome again to the Free Together, Free Apart Zoom series put on by the Vermont Center for Family Studies. I'm Cami Kelton, and I'm on the faculty of the Vermont Center for Family Studies. And today I'm here with Eric Thompson, our executive director, to have a conversation and a bit of a preview of the October conference that he's been working hard at producing. And this year's title is Inner Silence and Healthy Separateness, Exploring Relationships Between Differentiation, Transcendence, and Mindfulness. It's quite a title. Welcome, Eric.
A lot of words.
It is a lot of words. It's a good title. It's a bit mind-bending. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation and being able to ask you a little bit about just what brought you to producing this conference and what keeps you at it. I think this is the third annual, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I love that question. I too. Thank you, Cami, for being willing to spend some time with me on this topic. So, yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, I would say, Cami, there's all kinds of things I do in my life, in my professional world, working with businesses, my Vermont Center for Family Studies world, conferences I attend or produce. And this one is kind of the most important one to me.
Mm.
It's the one that's most, it's aligned with my interests. I mean, all the stuff I do, I find fascinating. I'm happy about that situation in my life, but this one is the one that's kind of like a stretch for me, and out there into me, like theory development kinds of questions. And so yeah, hence my persistence following my own interests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in a way that's not, it sounds like it's a good stretch and a good challenge.
Oh, it is. I love doing this. I mean, the conversations that are happening in the lead up, plus, I've always been like this for me. Vermont Center for Family Studies and Bowen Theory in general has been a great place for me to try to organize my thinking. And when I have to do a presentation, I spend time thinking about that topic. And this is probably the topic I'm most interested in trying to articulate what I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So
in this year's effort, I'm curious if you have come across something new in your thinking or discovered something that you would say is like, oh, I haven't thought about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's so much that's new.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? I'll tell you one thing that I've been noodling on. So my friend and colleague, John Kamak, is talking a lot about the default network of the brain. And I'm probably the least knowledgeable person on this call about what that actually means. But I feel that I can relate to it. And when I hear people describe it, I feel a sense of, you might say, intuitive understanding of it. And here's how I think about it is, what is it trying to describe, this default network? It's like a background. It's where the brain goes to without any effort, and sort of like the foundation upon which the other networks of the brain rest or are built upon.
Mm.
And I think of it as like, I'm very interested in effortless differentiation of self. So there's this wonderful phrase, differentiation of self is a way of thinking that eventually becomes a way of being. Well, I'm really interested in that last part, where it's a way of being that one doesn't feel so much like, messed up again, well, what a great opportunity. Instead, one thinks, wow, I spontaneously was more of a self in that tricky situation,
Mm.
which, I think is the promise of our efforts in Bowen theory. I don't know how many people on this call are deeply knowledgeable about Bowen theory, but it's a very aspirational body of knowledge
Mm.
where you're really seeking to be your best self in the family, and it's incredible the wisdom and specificity of information about that's in the body of knowledge, which is why I've been fascinated with for 25 years. I have some kind of a natural fascination with family leadership.
Well, you have a long history in both Bowen theory and meditation.
Yes.
I'm just kind of curious if you could talk a little bit about your background, a little bit more about your background in that. I think that might be interesting to people and inform them a little bit about your developing this conference.
Yeah. So shall I out myself? Yes, I have been a very steady meditator. I've been doing transcendental meditation for almost 40 years, and
Mm.
pretty much twice a day, every single day for all that time. I mean, it's a very rare day that I don't meditate twice a day. And
Oh.
it's one of the reasons I've done that is because it's really easy. And
Mm.
another reason is because from the beginning, I have felt very tangible positive impacts on my mind and my functioning. So
Mhm.
that plus, and then I ran into some relationship troubles and ran
We
into
all do.
and I was desperately in need of some wisdom, and that got me into Bowen theory like in 93.
Yeah.
TM in 83, Bowen theory in 93, stayed with them both the whole way.
Well, and one of the things you're describing, Eric, is it seems to be a very common both in Bowen theory and in meditative practices that they're people who invest themselves in them really see them as a lifelong effort, a lifelong investment because of that benefit.
Yeah, that's well said, Cami. And a lot of people have that experience with Bowen theory that it's like, oh my God, this is so helpful. And then they stay with it that's why they stay with it. And and these two things have been relatively separate for me. I never talked in Bowen networks about meditation ever until 5-6 years ago. Maybe there might be some clergy on this call, and I'm hoping this conference is going to be interesting to clergy because I would really like to have more dialogue with clergy about, how the descriptions of higher functioning that are in faith traditions integrate into this conversation. Because, just back to that default network for a sec, that this state of being, that's something these wisdom traditions speak a lot about, a state of being. And they describe these states of being in great depth and great detail. And I see a lot of cross-fertilization between these two bodies of knowledge. And it's not something everybody agrees with. It's a little bit, there's a lot of skepticism about that. People think it's kind of like running. Like meditation is like running, yeah, it's great. It's good for you, but it's not going to get you basic self. It's not going to get you to differentiate a self. I've sort of calmed down about that pushback, and I'm more like interested, like, yeah, maybe they're right, or maybe they're wrong. And I do think, I will say that I believe that at this point that comparing meditation to running in most cases is a bit like comparing a kazoo to a Steinway. I mean, that's a little insulting to running. I should upgrade the kazoo. But meditation has gears that exercise aren't going to get.
Yeah. I wonder if some of those gears are something, Eric, that people find over time in meditation and in Bowen theory. it takes, I think it takes time and effort over your development to sort of experience those different gears. I would imagine. I'm just sort of thinking about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, do you think people might sort of think they could get a quick fix from Bowen theory or meditation at times?
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, I think, as a therapist, one of the things that I have found is that in the last decade, 10 to 15 years, mindfulness meditation has been this huge sort of thing in our field where there's, that sort of word mindfulness is everywhere. And I think that, the practice and a dedicated practice can be so helpful to people, but I do think that there is this idea, even amongst professionals, that if we just throw a little of that at it, at the problem, it'll help. Well, just a little of that,
Tammy, has anyone ever tried to throw you at a problem?
All the time.
I know you're a practicing clinician, so.
Yeah, so it is. Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, that people can think of these things as quick fixes, and that they can, kind of sell them to people.
Which is not really, the masters of both traditions don't do that, and they don't talk about it that way. I'm not really an expert in mindfulness, but I'm really happy we got this Ral Khan. Ral Khan is a very distinguished researcher in this space. And I don't know if you saw this. He's going to give a talk on basically the neurophysiological locations of self.
Ooh.
So he's a neurophysiologist, and I think he's looked at this carefully. He's had many publications, lots of research projects. Where is self in the brain? He's going to do a question on that, which may harken back to this default network thing. But with TM, it's a low effort practice, which of course is one of my favorite things about it. I'm not very disciplined. I don't do hard things over and over again. But I don't know about that. I know a little bit about mindfulness.
Yeah.
But I wanted to say a little more I want to see if I can describe this default thing, that it's kind of like, how you have, say you're working on detriangling in an important relationship, and you're thinking a lot about it, and you're practicing. Maybe you're talking to a coach. Maybe you rehearse with the coach what you might say, or you journal, you write down, you have a vision. Okay, I'm going to do that. Then you get in the situation, you've forgotten all that, but you maybe have a little thought in your back of your mind. Okay, I know, and you had a vision, so then you execute, right? And for many of us, think, okay, wow, that worked a whole lot better. Even just having the thought that I'm in a triangle right now, I'm in a completely different mind state. This default network experience that I feel like I'm confident that it's strongly nourished by my meditation practice, is sort of stimulating a background state of neutrality in me that's quite tangible. That's one of the things that's surprising me about it, is how tangible it is. It's almost like I can feel the neutrality as almost like an abstract background reality that all my thoughts are separate from, but occurring within at times. Does that sound like a default network?
I'm going to have to attend the conference because this is so much of this is things I have some awareness of, but I need a lot more sort of information and exposure to it. But one of the things I'm curious about what you're saying is it, you know, this idea of a meditation tradition, and in Bowen theory, this idea of becoming more neutral. I mean, that's a big part of Bowen theory as I'm learning it, as I continue to learn it. And so I'm curious about the idea of how, what am I asking? What do you think is, given that idea about neutrality, how would you then talk about the connection between how meditation might serve the one in the process of becoming more differentiated, of working to become more differentiated?
I love that question. And by the way, if you're a total beginner, please come, Kim, because it's so good. The beginner's mind is so precious. Sometimes you can get kind of lost in expertise and you need a wake up from beginner's mind. So, yes. So I will say on the topic of neutrality, I believe wisdom traditions, every single one of them has a huge contribution to make through evoking. You could evoke through poetic language that's in the scriptures, or clarity from sages who experience it, what it is. And there's also information about how to get it. And we're going to hear talks at this conference, specifically 3 people. Suzanne Brew has found some very interesting information about what it means to be neutral as a mother. A sort of like beautiful vision of high functioning mother. She's found information about that through interviewing people in wisdom traditions and some quotes that are amazing. And then Leslie Fox, long-term Chicago-based Bowen theory teacher, is going to talk about that connection. And then also Marla Zippin, who's similarly very educated in both Bowen theory and meditation. I think neutrality is a state, that's such a fascinating state, isn't it? What the heck actually is that? And Bowen theory provides such good handles, like the simple idea of neutral in a triangle. 2 people in conflict, and you're sitting there, and you're actually not on either side. Can you do that while you're watching the news? Can you do that when your kids are going at it? Can you do that when your mother-in-law is going after your wife? And you're very attached to your wife being calm because you're not that mature. This is me. and so you're attached to her being calm. So what do? You start lecturing your wife about how to take an eye position with her mother. In that sort of a tone. You know? Don't you know about eye positions? I've been talking about this for 25 years and you still haven't gotten it. You know, this is, I caught myself doing this last weekend. And I was like, oh man, Thompson, so much for your default network. It was amazingly, but, and of course, what's more helpful is neutrality, presence. I'm not on this one side or on this one side. I'm present versus being on a side. So in a meditation, and I think that's a state of low threat. I'm not feeling threatened by this drama that's playing out between donkeys and elephants on the news, or, this side and that side, or my 2 kids. Less threatened by it, more interested. That right there, that's leadership. And I think that transcendence, I'm quite confident of this after almost 40 years, it can, it's like infuses the mind with a low threat state. Like during the practice, on a regular basis, I'll have the experience, wow, there's nothing threatening going on here at all.
Mm.
You know, it's like, I think that the deepest low threat states I experience in my life are during meditation. And then that impacts, I think, the default network, or the ancient metaphor of the screen behind the movie,
Mhm.
and brings in, it can be like a spring that trickles neutrality into experiences.
So Eric, would you say that those
Did that make any sense, Cami?
I'm still working on it. but here's what you've got me thinking about is how um, a meditative practice and effort in Bowen theory. I mean, Bowen theory is one of the things that has been so illuminating for me is the idea of chronic anxiety, chronic stress, low grade, chronic, and how often out of our awareness, you know. And I'm thinking about what you just described of that no threat state, that experience of no threat state. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about how that long time practice is maybe able to change a person's chronic stress or anxiety state.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something, if you follow it, there's been an explosion of interest among science, funded by NIH, funded by the military, on this question.
Mm.
As of course, you know, if you follow Bowen theory for decades, you have been the beneficiary of people like Mike Kerr's wonderful work on the connection between chronic stress and all kinds of diseases. So, and Sarah Davis did a wonderful presentation, didn't she, at our symposium on
Yes.
nation. It's a very helpful idea, because I think it gives people a sense. Some people go, oh, I could control my risk for these diseases by controlling and working on chronic stress. So these researchers like Fred Travis and Raul Khan, I want to ask them your question, because I think what I've heard them say is that the link is, there's a lot of evidence
Mm.
that not just the trait, which is a temporary experience, but the state. Wait, it's the other way. State versus trait. Trait is more stable. Trait is all-encompassing characteristic of an individual that doesn't go away much.
Mm-hmm.
That meditation affects chronic anxiety trait level. And yeah, there's all kinds of
Wow.
information about health effects, like the American Heart Association did a careful review of all the literature for complementary treatments for heart disease, with an emphasis on prevention. And they did a rating of all these complementary treatments, all the ones you can imagine, you know, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
chiropractic, herbs, whatever, meditation, of the research, the quality of the research on these different modalities. And they came out with a gold standard rating for transcendental meditation. It was really, like, they were, you know, very strongly endorsing it as a complementary method for preventing heart disease, which,
Mm.
you know, heart disease, so interesting how lots of heart disease develops because the heart muscle turns on and off too much.
Mm.
So it wears out quicker. It develops it becomes muscle bound.
Mm-hmm.
And the processes whereby the blockages build up is increased, accelerated by that inefficient, which is driven by fear.
Mm.
The heart's very responsive to fear.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's, you know, it's just nothing simple in this world. It's a complex system. This world is a complex system. But I think that's certainly a valid idea with support from science.
Mm.
Now, you know, people who are, we could get into these kinds of questions. If you meditate for 30 years, but you never do any work on your family, what happens to that person, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Versus the other way, most dedicated Bowen theory student on the planet, but you never meditate. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's probably not simple.
Yeah. And maybe, yeah, I mean, I think maybe we could run the risk of getting too prescriptive about what people should be doing. I do think that there's this idea in this conference, and I'm hoping, you know, that it's really piquing people's curiosity. To you know, I would imagine there will be people coming who have experience in both Bowen theory and some meditative practice, but maybe more people who are sort of exposed more to one than the other. And I'm
Yeah,
interested about what is the intersection of these two traditions.
and I hope we have some skeptics in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
That's very valuable, makes the meeting more interesting. Certainly from that. And you know, just on this prescription thing, I'll add this, that I find myself, I feel that I've actually grown, to my amazement. I'm less attached to my ideas about what other people should do.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that, again, it's kind of more natural to me now to be very interested. I'm naturally very interested in people, but I feel more like, hey, they're the author of this story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a kind of humility that like Mike Kerr models that so well. Like, this is not my story. You know, it would be dumb of me to think, even if it seems obvious, that I know what they should do. I mean, I've practiced that for years, Cami. You know, I worked on it really hard with very dramatic situations with self-harm. But I find now, I'm finding it, just like I said, it's kind of like I don't have to work. That's intriguing to me.
Yeah. How can something be a little more effortless? I'm interested in that too. Can you tell us a little bit, Eric, about just what people might expect from the 2 days? I think that might be useful to people who are considering coming.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So yes, it's going to be interactive. I'm going to share some of the talk titles now. Oh, by the way, just quickly, in October, we're going to have a recap, and I'm hoping that conference attendees will come to the recap meeting of this Free Together series, and I will ask them what their takeaways were. And the next week, you can see I have a distinguished guest, Michael Kerr, coming on this. But here are some of the titles of the talks. Just going to click through these fairly rapidly. Fred Travis has a cohort of people who score in a striking way on both neurophysiological and qualitative measures of higher stages of development. So he's got a research cohort of some people like that. He never tells you who they are. So that's a big interest of his. So these are some of the titles. Self-related brain processes is the one I was referring to. The transformation of self-related brain process. I want to know, what is a self-related brain process? And Amy Post is such a good storyteller. You know, People really liked her talk last year. She just tells great stories about differentiation of self. She's just a gifted teacher.
Mm.
So the conference is going to be a balance of it's going to be interactive, like we're going to get in a moment here, let people kind of think out loud with each other. There's going to be a balance of lectures and interaction. There's going to be a balance of science with stories. There's going to be a balance of differentiation of self and wisdom traditions, qualitative, quantitative. I'm going to try to keep the day not exhausting, 2 days. So many times, I found the same thing the last 2 years. The second day is better. It's like you kind of set the table and the second day goes to another level. And even though it's a big lift for people, I have been sort of stuck to that because I want that second day.
Mm.
Also, I would say to people too, just come for 1 day if you want. I mean, I'm trying to give a decent break, 45 minutes in the middle, 2 15-minute breaks, only going 9 to 3. So it's not an exhausting Zoom.
It sounds like it's nicely balanced. Yeah, some really interesting titles, Eric.
And let me throw out there also that if you're on this call, you can get a $50 discount if you sign up for the conference by Friday. Raz is going to send an email with the link so you can do that. Hey, if you want to pay the full price, we'll accept it because VCFS appreciates your support. And calls like these we're doing for free. And as you know, I've mentioned before, we rely on our donors. We keep our prices low and rely on our donors to do that. So if you appreciate these meetings, these calls, and you have your heart tells you to donate, please go for it. And it's easy to do on our website.
Mm.
So did I answer your question about kind of giving an overview, a sense of the conference?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's helpful for people to just envision what those 2 days will look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we do breakouts now?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. It's just about
Well,
that.
if you're sitting out there like I have nothing to say about this topic, you might find you do anyway. It's just a chance. Maybe we might do less than 10 minutes for this one, give you a chance to kind of explore maybe even what are your questions about it. If you're absolutely not interested in doing a breakout, you could take a break and come back in 10 minutes, come back into the same Zoom meeting with the same link in 10 minutes. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the Zoom functionality to put you in groups of 3 and give you a chance to just talk about your questions or your thoughts about this topic. What is healthy separateness? What is differentiation? What piqued your interest in terms of the conversation that Cami and I just had? And it just takes a minute for Zoom to do that. And then after that, it'll be about 10 minutes. We'll come back and I'll give people a chance to interact with us about this topic. And maybe ask me questions about the conference or the whole idea of it. I'm going to go ahead and create the breakout rooms now. All right, Cami, how was your breakout?
Good. I had a couple of very interesting people, one of whom was Suzanne, who is going to be presenting on the wisdom tradition and mothering. So that was quite, that was great.
Mm.
I think there's a lot of curiosity about the crossover of these two areas of thinking and being. Yeah.
Does anybody want to just unmute themselves and make a comment? What was fascinating to you in your breakout, or what's on your mind? You would wave your hand. Hi, Suzanne.
Hi.
Go ahead.
one of the things I've been interested in as I've been researching the topic that I'm presenting, and I'd like to, kind of throw this open to anybody else too, is raising children in the triangle of the transcendent. How that, how is that? How is that with, God or higher, some sort of higher state? How is that different from the here and now kind of raising children?
Uh-oh, she said the G word.
God, oh geez. I'm gonna be
That's all right.
canceled.
I welcome it. That's an interesting question. The triangle with God, or triangle with Mother Mary, or triangle with
Right.
your rabbi, or your maybe a minister that you find very inspiring, or Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Is that what you're getting at? Or you
Well, I think
specifically want to know about this triangle with something transcendental?
Right. That there's an afterlife, there's a prior life. What, people had any experience in observing that in raising children or being a parent or just.
There's an ancient tradition, Caroline, I'm going to let you, or Caroline, I'm going to let you answer in a sec, or see what you have to say. And what would welcome thoughts about this interesting question? I'm thinking for a sec, Suzanne, about, you mentioned like ancestors, like, there's a lot of old stories, like in Fiddler on the Roof of, well, that there it's a joke, but where people have an interaction with someone in a dream about another relationship, like maybe the great grandmother talks to you about your kid. Caroline, what are you thinking?
Well, I remember thinking before I had kids that kids, and I don't really know where I came up with this, but that the kids were coming to really help me grow. And boy, did I get what I asked for. And yeah, so I'm always in a conversation with like, what am I, which, for me, it's a higher power of some sort, but in a conversation of like, okay, so what am I supposed to be learning here? What is the sort of higher thinking about how to respond to this? I definitely fail a lot, but yeah, that is there. And it's really nice to kind of hear that idea actually stated.
It's kind of like another possible therapeutic triangle.
Yeah.
And both there's this idea of a neutral presence, and could be in a couples therapy, and that's very powerful, that neutral presence in the family. And so that could possibly be a figure of all sorts of different types who's that neutral third party.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. You kind of have a relationship with something like that, that's an ongoing relationship. How does that affect your parenting?
On good days, I'm more, it's just that it's being more thoughtful about what the response is. I think it helps me think longer term. And I think my own belief that, I totally have a belief that we come through this cycle several times, and that informs the way I think about what my job is.
No, thank you. Other observations or questions about the conference? Or love to hear from some folks I've never heard from before and meet you and see what's on your mind. Was that a hand, sir? Jim Linzel? Or was that just an adjustment of your... I'm curious, in this small group, what was interesting? If anybody wants to say a few words about that.
This is Flea, and in my small group, I think one thing that was interesting is by the end of the group, we were thinking it might be nice to be able to talk to each other regularly. And I don't know how that could happen, but is there a way that we can exchange information? Not about the conference, I guess. So
Yeah. I don't think I want to facilitate that, but I'm not opposed to it. I think if you can figure that out, more power to you.
thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Abrams.
Yes, in our group, Liz quoted Kathleen Smith as saying the opposite of anxiety is curiosity. And that ties in very nicely. That struck me well, among other things.
Can you say a little more about curiosity? I love that phrase. She said that on our webinar some months ago. Back to our, in case you don't know this, we have all these are recorded on YouTube and they're free. So you go to YouTube, Vermont Center for Family Studies. It's easy to find all these recordings, including the ones we did with Walter Smith on systemic racism from a Bowen theory perspective. There's about 4 of those. But curiosity, Abrams, tell me a little about curiosity.
Well, it's tied in. I mean, it's fundamental from Dr. Bowen.
Yeah.
And I think you cited it too, to be present, to be neutral. Big aid to that is counterbalance to needing to fix is curiosity. And curiosity, I think my understanding is actually it's part of, I think it's associated with high intelligence. If you're very curious, maybe your attention is raised. You're very focused. You're learning things. You're discerning things that you otherwise might not. In some forms of meditation, the student is advised to simply observe the process, the chaos, whatever's going on, good, bad, or otherwise, just to be curious about it without being attached or trying to change or judge. So it's another term I find in the Bowen thinking that's very rich and connects to wide and significant implications. I mean, that's my short answer.
Mark Abrams, my IQ and EQ was quite low when I was telling my wife what to do about her mom. That was a striking example of Eric Thompson, low IQ, low curious. But it's so true that curiosity is almost like medicine. You know, maybe for the individual's mind, but for the system as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's negatively associated with anxiety, perhaps. What's she say here? Yeah, that's what Kathleen Smith said. That seems very true.
Then we have time for one more observation or question or comment. It's been a nice discussion. One thing I like about this conference traditionally, it's been a little bit smaller than some of our other ones. And I think that's a real plus because we have tended to have a rich discussion, especially the second day. So, and it's okay if the pace of that is a little bit slower. So let me just ask, there's anyone who hasn't spoken who would like to throw a few words in. Yes, Linda.
So in our small group, I shared with Flea and Caroline that I'm recovering from lung cancer surgery, and this diagnosis seemed to come out of nowhere. I have no risk factors and never smoked and all of that. And it's very hard for me not to get into cause and effect thinking. about, well, if I had been doing transcendental meditation for 10 years, maybe I wouldn't have gotten a cancer. Or if I had worked more carefully and more diligently at applying Bowen theory in my life, maybe I wouldn't have gotten this cancer. Or maybe if I start doing transcendental, it's all sort of bargaining. Maybe if I start doing transcendental meditation now and I do it for the next 10 years, then maybe I won't have a recurrence of this cancer. And it's a battle for me to not get into that kind of thinking. Any advice around that?
A lot of people feel that way about meditating. Oh, I should meditate, or oh, I'm not good at meditating. Oh, I
Or
learned
like,
it once.
or you know, if the
I never
studies
do
do,
it.
if the studies do show that it helps, you
What
know,
am I
to
thinking? Why
mitigate.
aren't I doing it?
What?
No,
Say
but
again?
people might think that, like, oh, what's wrong with me? Why am I not doing that?
Hmm.
Well, I don't think anyone could have worked harder on Bowen theory than you, Linda Biontech.
I don't know.
You worked pretty hard on it for a long time.
I'd say I've been in and out of it, is what I'd say.
Well, who's not?
But I've not done meditation consistently, and really I get thinking cause and effect. Like if I had been meditating, kind of kicking myself, you know, if I'd been doing this for the last 10 years, then maybe I wouldn't have gotten the cancer. But no one will ever know.
What are the advantages to having cancer?
Well, I've gotten a bunch so far.
Hmm.
Actually, it's been a fascinating journey. That's something I've gotten very curious about, the whole journey with cancer, which I don't have anymore, by the way. It's totally gone.
I appreciate you just being so open with us.
You said you wanted to hear from people you never heard from before, so.
Suzanne Brew asked me, how'd you stabilize yourself after interaction with wife and mother-in-law? Well, what I did was I laid down about 10 o'clock and I went to sleep for 8 hours. It was a very high-tech intervention. I woke up, I had a good night's sleep, and I was like, oh, wow. Can you believe that you're doing the exact thing that you have taught people not to do for 20 years? I want to leave you with a quote. This is a quote I'm going to be using during the conference. Some of you might be familiar with this wonderful quote that got shared last year by our friend and colleague, Dr. Lori Lassiter, on the state of differentiation of self. Apparently, these are words Bowen used to describe a person in that state. Not taking things personally, not trying to change how you feel or think about me. I'm not blaming others. Okay, that's enough right there. We don't really need to go on. I mean, that's amazing right there. I'm not trying to make you feel bad because you said something hurtful to me. I'm glad to be with you, but I'm free. I'm also free. I'm all those things, but I'm also free. Not afraid of rejection, not worried about how you feel or react. Maybe we could add in, and I'm really, really curious. All right, folks, I hope I get to see you, some of you, in a few weeks at the conference, and if not, maybe at the recap. Thank you for joining us today. And Cammie, thank you. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. You're so welcome, Eric. Take care, everyone.
That was fun. Bye.